on Friday morning, I have to say, to a certain degree of bewilderment, believing that the new American regime were going to be non-interventionist, America first, and all the rest of the stuff that Trump got elected on. But I do understand that chemical weapons killing all those people, including those children, if the American government had absolute proof positive that it was Assad's regime that dropped chemical bombs from the air, they would have been conscious of the fact that President Obama put down a red line. He said to Assad, if you go beyond that line, we will act. And when he went beyond that line, guess what? He didn't act. And I think there are many that thought that America looked very, very weak on the world stage. So there may well have been an element there of the president saying, don't mess with us. The principles that Obama had laid down are good. Don't mess with us. And perhaps also a message to China about North Korea that America is serious about doing something. So I, despite my initial reservations, was quite prepared to think by Friday evening that if this was a one-off selected strike to show don't mess about with us, that's okay. My fear, though, right from Friday morning, is that this might escalate. And the thing that really worried me was, would we make the same mistake we made a few years ago with Iraq? Remember? Saddam Hussein, bad man, secular dictator, used mustard gas. He'd used it against the Kurds. We were told that behind that there was a massive arsenal that threatened all of us, and we went to war. The reason we did it was for regime change. We convinced ourselves that if we got rid of a secular dictator, what would come after would be better. We even convinced ourselves in Libya that that was the same case. Well, I didn't have to wait very long to see this escalate. And first up was the UK Defence Secretary, Sir Michael Fallon.
We've made our assessment just as the Americans have, using our various intelligence sources, and we believe it's highly likely that the regime was responsible. The United States is in no doubt about it, and that's why they took the action which we fully support.
Now, that's gone a little bit further, because the US Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, now basically says that America will stand up against anyone in the world who commits crimes against humanity. Tillerson today has been at a meeting of G7 foreign ministers in Italy. And this is what Tillerson had to say today.
We remember the events of August 12, 1944 that occurred in Sant'Anna, and we rededicate ourselves to holding to account any and all who commit crimes against the innocents anywhere in the world.
So he was speaking at a scene where in 1944 there was a Nazi massacre where 500 Italian villages were wiped out, and he was equating that very much with what happened with the gas attack. And basically what Tillerson was saying is that America is going to become the world's policeman again, which is a very long way from a policy of America first, a very long way from saying, unless this directly affects us, we're not going to get involved. And not to be forgotten, this country has a foreign secretary. His name is Boris Johnson. He has actually decided not to go to Russia this week. He had a meeting to go over there to meet Putin and everybody. He's withdrawn from that meeting, which I find, I must say, very curious. But this is what Boris had to say just a couple of hours ago.
That choice is to stick like glue to the Assad regime, with all that entails, that toxic regime that poisons its own people and indeed is poisoning the reputation of Russia, or to work with the rest of the world to find a solution for Syria, a political solution. And let me emphasize that that is what people are trying to achieve.
So what we're doing here is we're not just condemning Bashar al-Assad, we're condemning Russia for being his ally. Effectively, we're saying it's Russia's fault that this terrible gas attack happened last week. And quite why Boris is happy to speak to the microphone condemning Putin's Russia, but he doesn't seem to have the guts to want to go there himself and talk to them. Seems to me he's rather subcontracted that out to Rex Tillerson and the USA. I'm a supporter of Donald Trump. I'm nervous about these developments. I'm a supporter of Donald Trump. I want us to be close friends and allies with America, but I don't want us to be America's poodle. And it seems to me that Boris, by not going, by leaving it all to the Americans, effectively, that is what you're doing. So I'm worried, I'm nervous, I've seen regime change as a goal make things in the Middle East worse, not better. And it seems to me pretty clear we are now involved in a full-scale diplomatic war between the G7, who are now acting as if they're the UN Security Council, between the G7 and Syria, Russia and Iran. And my question to you tonight, and it is a big, fundamental question, is should the West get involved in regime change in Syria? Now, if you think something has to be done, because it's unacceptable that a regime that may well have used gas on its own people last week, if that's how you feel that we must do something, then call me on 0345 60 60 973. If you think it's simply not our problem, there's nothing we can do to make things better, then text me on 84850. If you think, actually, Boris has got it right, and just let the Americans get on with it, and we can maybe withdraw from meetings and give the odd supportive statement, but not really get too involved in this, then you can tweet at LBC using the hashtag Farage and LBC, and you can watch me live on LBC's Facebook page now. Some breaking news. Multiple people are shot at an elementary school in San Bernardino, California. SAFAR officials will bring you more as we hear. San Bernardino, which of course was the scene of a previous terrorist atrocity. We'll bring you more on that as it develops. For now, we're talking about whether we, as a matter of policy, should try, and perhaps knocking Russia out of the way, is part of the means of getting rid of Assad. Should regime change be what we in the West are aimed at? Well, I'm going to go first to Jack in Guildford, Surrey, to ask him that very question.
All right, I'd say, Nigel, relax.
Yeah, OK, go on.
I'll tell you the reason for why Russia wants to get involved in the Middle East. Everybody who has ever been involved in the Middle East, just like Afghanistan, have suffered a bloody nose. Mm-hmm. And I think what Donald Trump has done, he hasn't wrecked the airfield. He sent a very calculated message. Play with naughty toys and you're going to get a smack. And I think if we can stir it up for the Russians and get them more involved in the Middle East, the more that they're going to hurt and keep their eyes off the likes of the Baltic states, it'll tie them up.
Well, Jack, hang on. I mean, are you saying that if the Middle East wasn't happening, that Putin would be considering going into the Baltic states?
There's enough Russians living in the Baltic states, ethnic Russians.
There are in parts of them. That's certainly true.
And there are a lot of ethnic Russians living in the Ukraine and elsewhere. So, I mean, all they've got to do is turn around and say, we want you to come and save us because we're being mistreated by the Baltic states. Or he might make that up, like he did in the Ukraine. And the next thing you know, we've got a far bigger problem than Syria.
Well, I have to say, I do get the fact there are Russian-speaking enclaves within the Baltic states, but I don't actually think against NATO he would even dare contemplate anything like that. But your point about people getting their fingers burnt, it's interesting actually that the Russian representative to the United Nations said today, and he was talking to the British, he said, don't even try to get into fights in the Arab world. Nothing will work and nothing will be achieved. So the Russians are conscious that if they get heavily involved in this, it will be for them like Afghanistan. And I absolutely get that. But Jack, let me just take you back to Assad. Do you think the right thing for us to do together with the Americans and everybody else in the G7 is to try to get rid of him as the leader?
It's a bit like getting rid of Saddam Hussein and getting rid of Gaddafi. I mean, once you take the top off the pressure pot, and then it explodes.
Right.
The steam comes out. I mean, there are so many sects in the Islamic world: the Druze, the Sunnis, the Shia,
of course,
the Alawites. I mean, something needs to keep, if you're going to have that, or cut them up into regions.
Yeah.
But something needs to be done.
And there is another point, Jack, that I think's been completely forgotten by virtually every commentator since those airstrikes that we heard about on Friday morning our time, which is this, that Assad is engaged, however bad he may be, but Assad is engaged in the fight and in the war against ISIS, that Putin is a sworn enemy of ISIS too. And I just worry, perhaps, Jack, we've lost sight of that. I thank you very much for your thoughts and your calls. And I go to Drew in Islington. Good evening, Drew. What do you think?
Hi, Nigel. Do you think this has got anything to do with insiders' positions versus outsiders' positions? It seems that regardless of whatever wing you're on, left or right, when you're an outsider, you don't feel that you should be as anti-Putin. And as soon as you become an insider, you suddenly become anti-Putin overnight. I mean, I predicted at the inauguration of Trump that he could potentially become the most anti-Putin president yet once he realizes the agenda. And I think it might have something to do with the petrodollar. What are your thoughts on that?
It may be that, but I think it's probably less to do with the petrodollar and more to do with when an outsider becomes an insider, wherever it is likely that he or she will start to adopt some of the views of people around them. And, you go into the American administration, and you've got the State Department and you've got the G7 at which they're at today. So it could be that there has been a change of thinking. Certainly, Drew, what I do know is there are many, many, many Trump supporters who are sucking their teeth at the moment, just not quite sure whether they're going to get what they voted for. So, Drew, very interesting point. Insiders, outsiders. The outside comes in, perhaps they change. On tweet, Nigel, I feel the rocket strike on Assad should be viewed as a one-off and not a policy reversal. More of a shot across the bow, says Rob. Rob, if it was that, I would be much, much more relaxed than I am right now. So just to remind you of the breaking news, we're hearing that multiple people have been shot at an elementary school in San Bernardino, California. We'll bring you more details of that as we get them. Right now, you're listening to The Nigel Farage Show. Cruise missile strike overnight from the Americans against Assad, Syria, now appears to be not just a one-off, very, very surgical hit to show Assad and others that they cannot use chemical weapons because that is unacceptable. Now it's an all-out diplomatic war with, I'm afraid, some leading figures now talking very openly about regime change and the need for Assad to go. And that worries me because of the past history. When we did it in Iraq, we did it in Libya, far from making things better, we made it worse. And where does this leave the battle against ISIS? Surely, if you get rid of Assad now, you actually let ISIS off the hook in Syria when they're perhaps on the verge of being beaten. Not everywhere, but at least just there. On Twitter, nope, let them deal with their own mess. On Twitter, just think, if the US and Russia work together to eliminate ISIS, ulterior motives at work, suggests Jeff Lane. And Peter in Glasgow sends me a text and says, Nigel, do you feel like a lot of Trump supporters that you've now been had? Well, no, I don't feel that yet, but I am worried about the direction that all of this is going on. No, enough. Pointless wars in the Middle East. It doesn't work. That's from Liberty News on Twitter. So there are a lot of people very worried about this, a lot of Trump supporters concerned about where this will all end, and the British, well, Boris Johnson now saying very tough things. The UK's ambassador to the UN, Matthew Rycroft, says that Assad is the greatest war criminal of all. So we're in a full diplomatic war with Boris Johnson now in the lead, and yet he's cancelled his meeting. If he really felt like this, why not go and meet Putin and tell him how you feel face to face? Why let the Americans do all of the heavy lifting? Should we, in the West, be getting involved with regime change in Syria? I'm going to ask Tom in Greenwich that very question.
I don't think they've got the right to overthrow any government, especially when it's been elected. I mean, you can take this right back to when they said they went into Russia went into the USSR, went into Afghanistan, and the Americans said, "We're going to give them their created the terrorists, the Mujahideen." And it's all stemmed from there. We've had terrorism ever since. Do they want Syria now to be Russia's new Vietnam? Whatever happened to, George Orwell, not war?
Tom, I don't know, man. I don't know. It seems to me that in the modern world, so many politicians seem to think that war is something we should jump into fairly lightly rather than it being the last resort. I'm going to leave you, Tom, because your line was rotten. And just a reminder, please, for all of you, how this actually started. We go back to March 2011 with pro-democracy, peaceful pro-democracy demonstrations taking place in Syria. And this, of course, was all part of the Arab Spring. Do you remember those popular uprisings against these dictators that many in the West thought would usher in some wonderful new age of peace and democracy across the Middle East. And it's those peaceful protests that have now led to a full-scale, all-out civil war with Russia backing the government and with ISIS now mixed in and perhaps the dominant part, maybe not, but certainly a part of the rebels, and a conflict in which now 1/3 people have been killed. Just worth remembering that they started off as peaceful street protests. I'm going to go to Chris in Stirling. Chris, tell me, should it be our objective now to get rid of Assad at all costs?
I think we're being played. I think that the whole thing doesn't smell right at all.
Okay.
If you think about it, cui bono, who benefits from this? Assad was making gains. Russia was making gains with them.
Yes.
It's very difficult to know what's true when you look at different reports, but it looks like whoever did it managed to kill a whole load of innocent people. There wasn't any sort of military target there, or there was a military target there that had chemical weapons, and they bombed it just to get rid of it, which didn't obviously work. They had a chemical weapon which is many times more dangerous than cyanide, and nothing like the phosgene and chlorine that's been used in the past.
Mm-hmm.
This is very, very strange. So the question is, who benefits? If it's not Assad and it's not Russia, because, if they're making gains and they're bringing upon themselves international opprobrium, when we're just about to have 2 meetings, the names of which escape me, regarding funding and further strategy in Syria, the person who did it is probably somebody who wants to perpetuate this war. It's somebody who wants to remove Assad, because that's what this would probably lead to.
I must say, Chris, my first thoughts were, why, when he's winning, would Assad actually do this? And that was my first thought. It's also worth pointing out, Chris, to people that it isn't just Assad that has used chemical weapons. There was a big piece in the New York Times on Saturday saying that ISIS have used chemical agents of some kind on 52 separately recorded occasions. So, I do wonder, Chris, whether you're right. Look, there's no question that the aeroplane that was dropping bombs was from Assad's side. ISIS don't have aeroplanes, thank goodness. But it could well be that they bombed a target that was holding chemical gas. I just don't know, Chris, the rights and wrongs of this. What I do know, though, is that it's escalated since Friday morning. It's escalated within 72 hours, now into an all-out diplomatic war with, governments now itching to get rid of Assad without any plan, it seems to me, Chris, of what should replace him. What say you to that?
I agree, absolutely. If you look at, I've read the same piece that you did. The interesting points are that, yes, they use chemical weapons, but sarin is quite different to the other stuff. You've got to be one of the big players to get hold of it. So either somebody really, really irresponsible has given it to ISIS, or it's been. One could presume that it's actually come from, somewhere else to implicate Russia. But I agree. I think it's something that we're going to have to go in very, very carefully with. And I was very conflicted to find that Tim Farron was supporting Donald Trump.
Oh, I know. It's amazing, isn't it? If everyone that hates Trump lined up and said what a hero he was. He must have been a bit confused over the course of the weekend too, mustn't he? Chris, I thank you very much indeed for your points and your concerns. On Twitter, we tried regime change in Iraq, Libya and Afghanistan. Total disaster. We should be working with Syria to destroy ISIS, says Councillor Brian Sylvester. Nigel, have we not learned anything from history? We need to stay out of it. These dictators do bring stability to these areas and keep the peace. Those desperate for war sat in their comfortable offices, homes and chairs, should, if we go to war, be made to don military garb and placed in the vanguard of any military operation, says Dave Howard. Dave, I don't think we're going to be sending our politicians to go and fight in any wars. It ain't going to happen. Steve in Romford, should we get rid of Assad at all costs?
Well, no, I'm looking at it from a wider picture, Nigel. What I'm looking at is a big fan of yours, by the way.
Thank you.
Knighthood.
Some chance.
This is the thing. Why are we even worried about our friend, Mr. Putin? We know just what a wrong he is, as we'd say in my part of the world, East London.
Yep.
America has the most ferocious military machine in the history of the universe. You add that to the British, the French and all of our allies, Mr. Putin, possibly the richest man in the world, his ego's in tatters. His ego's in tatters. And do you think he would fire upon an American aircraft carrier?
No, not upon an American aircraft carrier. But what did worry me was the language that Russia and Iran were using in response to the sort of diplomatic war that we've launched, not just on Syria, but on them as well. And I guess what we're trying to do now is knock away the supports for Assad. The worry, Steve, isn't a conscious attack by Russia. It's just not going to happen. But it is that a jet gets shot down somewhere over a no-fly zone or whatever it is. That's the worry, is that you could get, what looks like the Cold War being replayed here today, frankly, could spark into something. Steve, would you? Let's say you're Boris Johnson. You're the Foreign Secretary. Would you be supporting a policy that says we get rid of Assad?
Yes, I would.
You would?
But we've got to look at this. Assad's main backers, Iran and Russia, they are peasants.
Right.
Disrespectful.
But it doesn't mean they haven't got military hardware, doesn't mean they've got capability, doesn't mean they couldn't do us great harm, does it? And we've lost the line. On Facebook, Jay says, "Hi, Nigel. When you say, should the West get involved, you really mean the UK and the USA. Yes, Jay, I do. Because the reality is, in any military conflict, any NATO use, it's going to be the UK and the USA in the vanguard." John says, "Boris should have gone to Russia." I couldn't agree more, John. Stuart says, "I'm quite happy that Boris isn't going. He's not up to the job." Well, give him a chance, Stuart. He's only just got the job. I mean, Mrs May's kept him locked up for most of the first few months. This is almost his first proper outing. Malcolm says, "No, leave it to the Arab states to sort the whole thing out." And Daphne says, "I don't understand how the West can fight on the opposite of Assad and Russia, who are fighting IS. Assad is not a threat to international security. IS is." Well, Daphne, I have to say, to me, that is the big point that everyone keeps forgetting. And it is that actually the biggest threat we face in the West and to our way of life, and we don't yet know what's happened in San Bernardino, but we do know what happened in Stockholm just the other day. The biggest threat we face is this horrible new form of Islamic terrorism. And actually, on that, we're on the same side as people we wouldn't naturally take home to meet our mum for tea on a Sunday afternoon. But sometimes my enemy's enemy is my friend. You're listening to the
6060973.
Reports are coming in of a shooting at an elementary school in California. Emergency services say that 4 people have been shot at North Park site in San Bernardino. And to update us on this situation, I'm joined by Michael Hiltzik from the Los Angeles Times. Michael, good afternoon where you are. What do we know at this stage about this shooting?
Well, at this point, we don't really know much. This is something that happened really about an hour ago at 10:30 in the morning, our time out here. What we're told by authorities is that 4 victims were being treated, and a 5th person who is described as possibly the suspect has also possibly been injured. There aren't a lot of details, but the authorities are saying that they believe that what happened here was a murder-suicide.
Right.
That happened in a classroom, which suggests that this was something more in the neighborhood of a domestic dispute or a dispute between 2 people, though they do say that 2 students have been brought to the hospital.
Right. Because when I heard the name San Bernardino, a little bell went off in my head because there was a horrible event there. Was it last year or the year before?
It was in 2015.
Yeah. And just remind us what that was, please, Michael.
Well, that was more in the nature of what seemed to be a terrorist attack. It was an employee of a company who entered his company's Christmas celebration with other employees, and then and basically shot a number of his former fellow employees. This does not necessarily look like it's something like that. As I said, it looks much more like basically a personal dispute of one sort or another between one person, and possibly, we don't really know, but one would reason that if somebody entered a classroom with a gun, he was probably looking for the teacher. But once again, we really do not have those sorts of...
No, I get that. Tell me, how could somebody with a gun get into a school in America? Surely you've got gates and security and metal detectors, or doesn't it work like that?
Well, some schools you will have that, but not in every school. And I think at an elementary school, essentially in a suburb or even an exurb, you might not have that sort of security. We don't have students or faculty passing through screening detectors at every school by any means.
No. Michael, listen, thank you very much for the update on this situation. Thank you for coming on the line, and our thoughts are with the people in San Bernardino this evening. Thank you. I return to the topic that we're debating, which is we are now engaged in an all-out, full-scale diplomatic war against Syria, against Russia, and against Iran, and it is now perfectly clear that the president, whether he intended it to be a one-off hit with those cruise missiles or not, there are many others using that situation to now argue for regime change. You remember regime change. We did it in Iraq. We did it in Libya. Arguably, we made things worse, not better, but we want, apparently, to do it all again. And I'm asking you, does that regime change make sense? I really don't think it does. But it's your show more than it's mine. So I'm going to ask Alexei in Guildford. Good evening.
Hi, Nigel. Thanks so much for having me on. I'm Russian, and I was a big Trump supporter until all of this happened. I feel like we've been completely duped. You know, Trump ran on the idea that he put America first. He would stop all these interventions.
Yep.
And he's basically broken his biggest promise, which is America first, based on something. I mean, come on. We cannot jump to conclusions. We do not know that Assad has done this. We know that the rebels have used chemical weapons before. I think people like you should really hold Trump to this big time. And I'm not saying that you're making excuses. I really appreciate the way you've reacted.
I've made no excuses at all for this, Alexei. And all I've said is it may be that he as president is privy to information that we're not. You know, he may have absolute proof that Assad did do this, and given how weak America looked in the eyes of the world after Obama put down a red line and didn't act, that's why he did it. So as far as we know so far, Alexei, this could be, as far as the president's concerned, a one-off action. But there is now an absolute wall of pressure building, and it isn't just in the States. It's happening here with our ambassador to the UN, with what Boris Johnson is saying. With what Michael Fallon is saying. We're ratcheting this up. And I very much hope, Alexei, I really hope that Trump resists all of this. So I haven't given up faith with him. I know I've been criticised, and the media say, oh, well, Farage turns against Trump. It's the kind of thing they always try to do. But I'm really against this political establishment who seem to have learned nothing from the past at all. And now, apparently, Mr. Johnson wants to put stronger sanctions on Russia too. So, Alexei, what should we do?
Well, I think, America has no legal right technically to be in Syria right now. They didn't get permission from the UN. I think Trump needs to stick to his promise, which is America first. If they really want Assad to go, then, personally, I don't think it's their say. I don't think it's any of us say. I think it's for the Syrian people to decide. But I'm just so disappointed, I was so... When when Donald Trump had won the presidency and he was talking about how he was going to improve relations with Russia, as a Russian person, I was so happy. I couldn't wait for him to meet with Putin, and because we all know there's no real reason for Russia and the West to be at each other's teeth.
Well, and we do have a common...
We're both fighting ISIS. We have common enemies.
Exactly.
My home city of St. Petersburg got attacked recently, and ISIS claimed responsibility, I think. I'm not sure, but there was a terrorist attack. We've got common enemies. There's no reason for us to have any sort of war or Cold War or diplomatic war. Or it's just I'm just really disappointed.
No, Alexei, you've made your point beautifully and clearly, and I thank you very much indeed for your call. Bridget on Twitter says, no, it will lead to escalation and terrifying consequences. No, this is about an oil pipeline and greed. It's disgusting. And I hope that level heads prevail. No, learn from the Libya lesson. Saeed says, I cannot believe I'm agreeing with Nigel Farage. It happens, Saeed. It does happen. Graham, no, we need to keep out of it. We don't have the men, women, power, or the structure. Well, whether we have the men, women, the power, or the structure militarily, America does. And of that, there's no question, and there's no doubt. I'm going to go to David in Newcastle. David, should we get involved in this? Should we aim at regime change?
Good evening, Nigel. How are you doing?
All right.
The short answer to your question is no, we shouldn't get involved with regime change. I think it should be done out by the Syrian people through the correct roadmap. But you're never going to get the correct roadmap at the minute because everyone's getting lost at the most fundamental thing. If you look at the geopolitical landscape across what's going on in Syria, everybody needs a boogeyman. Everyone needs a new Bin Laden or a new Saddam Hussein. And Assad's just exactly that. And what are you going to leave? You're going to leave yet another vacuum in the Middle East from some sort of rebel group, i.e. an Al-Qaeda or an ISIS to form a group and take it in. Then you'll end up with Iraq Mark II, Libya Mark III, and the rest of it. Like I said, we'll never learn from it. I think on the President Trump thing, I think it was Obama put down a red line in 2013 or 2015 that said if chemical gas is used, you will apply it.
That's right.
And to that end, what does Assad actually gain by using that? Well, if I use chemical gas and everyone knows and all the eyes are on Syria, I'm just going to have the might of the US and everyone else and undo the kind of the work that's going on. So I think there's probably some political thing going on there. I'm not suggesting by any means it was a false flag attack, but in the past there has been cases and examples. I think it was 2013 again when the rebels were actually using this. So I think there's greater investigation needs into it, and then we need to actually get back onto the track of the ISIS and the Al-Qaeda.
Well, David, that's the big picture. But I would also say this to you, that this idea that you can pick goodies and baddies in these very complex situations in the Middle East, frankly, is ludicrous. When I heard the British government trying to get the British Parliament engaged more deeply militarily in 2013 to help the rebels, who were the good guys, the nice guys, we should all be happy to give money and weapons to the rebels. Oh, but don't we find that ISIS actually make up a substantial part of the rebels? Not easy picking goodies and baddies, and perhaps we ought to say, as a nation, that pretty much everything we've done in large parts of the Middle East since 1918, frankly, has been a bit of a disaster. If you agree with that or disagree with that, call me on 0345 6060 973. I'm saying we should not be aiming at regime change. When will we learn? Right now. Regime change, it's in the wind. That's what the Western politicians want. The very same people who were pro the Iraq war and pro Libya, they're at it again. They want to get rid of Assad at all costs and be as rude as they possibly can be in the process to Russia and Iran. John on Facebook says, so how many children will you let Assad and Putin murder before you will do something? I wonder what Sam in Portsmouth makes of that. Sam, I'm being told, because I don't want to get involved militarily, that actually I'm standing by whilst atrocities are taking place, and that apparently is a reason for us to get rid of Assad at all costs. What do you make of that, Sam?
I think the trouble with Assad is that he's gone off the radar of Americans. That Rex Tillerson said that he was off the radar. All of a sudden, the chemical attack happens, and he's back on the radar. I think it's media and terrorist groups that are starting to try and cause too much trouble.
Yeah, it is interesting, isn't it? And I've made this point already, but I've got a tweet here in front of me. Why would Assad use chemical weapons on his own people when he's winning? Why jeopardise that? It makes no sense for him to do it. I did sort of half think this, Sam, on Friday morning.
I think it's very strange because he's gone sort of quiet, Assad, and they are defeating ISIS.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, he goes off the radar, like I said, and then all of a sudden he is now back in the limelight. And America stepping in is not good. We do not want to be going to war over this.
No, we don't. Sam, I couldn't agree with you more. And I would say to people like John, Val says the same thing. The killing won't stop until the killers are stopped. The point is, so you can criticise, but look what ISIS are doing. Look what ISIS do when they take over towns in Iraq. Look at what happens to anyone that opposes them. Look at what happens to women. Look at the indoctrination of children. Sam, is it for us to sort out the problems of the Middle East now?
No, it's not. We need to sort our own problems out. We don't need to be sorting out theirs. We need to stay far away as possible.
Fine. Sam, that's, I think, something that I sense this evening, and there are very strong views on both sides of this, by the way, but I sense this evening a majority of people are nervous and concerned about this. Thank you very much indeed, Sam. Nigel, I agree with you. We should be cautious. I think it stinks, says Dave, by text. The last time the West was involved in regime change, they went into a recession after. War costs billions. Unaffordable. Possible. A government that does nothing about the killing of its own people is just as culpable as one that kills theirs. Well, as I keep saying, if you play this morality game, if you try and pick winners and losers, you try and pick goodies and baddies in a complex situation in the Middle East, I'm not sure you're going to find any easy answers. David from Belfast, you've seen conflict in your own city in the past, and perhaps things are rather better now than they were. Should we remove Assad? Should regime change now be our objective?
Yes, I think so. I think it's got to the point where it's justified. And I would like to ask you, Nigel, what more would Assad have to do himself for you to think it's justified? He's already used chemical weapons twice now. He barrel bombs civilian targets, hospitals. There's thousands and thousands of young men disappearing. There's executions without trial, mass graves. He's denying aid getting through. At what point do you think then it is justified?
Well,
Because
David.
Myself, I think we're at this point.
David, I wasn't arguing that I was an Assad supporter. What I was arguing is that recent history has taught us that secular dictators, who, yes, do terrible things, but that secular dictators in countries like this actually does at least provide stability. You get rid of them, you create a vacuum, and into that we've seen ISIS step. I'm arguing, David. I'm not arguing for one side or the others. I've been saying for the last 5 minutes, we can't pick goodies and baddies in all of this. I'm arguing, David, we shouldn't get involved and that regime change should not be the West's priority.
Well, I was always taught by my family and my father that if you're in a position to help someone who desperately needs your help, you can't just stand back and watch.
So if we were, David, okay, fine, I get that. So if we were to do all that we can to knock away the props, to perhaps escalate the bombing or whatever it may be, if we do get rid of Assad right now, who really benefits from that, do you think?
The people.
What about ISIS?
Living under his tyranny.
Well, supposing they then have to live under an ISIS tyranny. Look at those Iraqi towns that have been... Look at parts of Afghanistan. Look at what's happened to those people's lives. My worry, David, my worry here is that maybe our distaste, and by the way, like you, I've heard all sorts of reports of what goes on in Syrian prisons and all the rest of it, and it's pretty ugly and pretty ghastly. My worry, David, is we might just be losing sight of a bigger problem that actually does threaten our way of life in the West. That's my problem, David.
Yeah, but again, we wouldn't just take out Assad and just then go dust our hands of the place. Iraq didn't fall until we left.
Okay.
So we got rid of Saddam and stayed there for a while and tried to build it. It was only whenever we left that it imploded again.
Well, if we and the Americans are going to do this, we're probably going to have to start building the British Army very, very substantially. David, I thank you. And I was waiting for the first call from the USA. I know that some of you can get through from the USA. Some of you find it very difficult on this phone number to get through to us because of different networks and the way in which they work. But Michelle from Cincinnati is on the line. And Michelle, I was quite shocked to see on Friday morning our time what had happened overnight, and I'm now getting a bit worried with what Rex Tillerson and other people are saying. I'm sort of feeling, Michelle, here we go again. Do you think it's the right thing that we should be aiming at regime change in Syria?
Absolutely not. And by the way, Nigel, this is Leah Michelle that called in about a month ago.
Oh, I remember. Yes. Very nice to hear from you both.
Okay, so, really in all honesty, I think that Trump is being led astray. I think that between Rex Tillerson and McMaster and Jared Kushner in there, I think that they are kind of pushing this globalist agenda. And I think as the American people and the rest of the West continue to outcry and say, Trump, stop, what are you doing? Wake up. I think that he will, but I think that we are in a very dangerous position right now where he's listening to all of the wrong people because they pushed out Flynn and they've pushed out so many of the other people that were crucial.
Well, the irony is that he's now getting public support from people that hate him. And I wonder, you two, you've been big, vocal Trump supporters and bloggers, and you've made yourselves quite well known in the States for what you've done. How as Trump supporters, are you feeling worried about this?
No, I don't think we're feeling worried at all. I'm really excited because there's so many Trump supporters that are saying, Trump, this is not how you ran your campaign. You ran a campaign on not intervening in Syria. Yeah. And when we look at 2013, it was never finally proven that Assad had these chemical weapons. And when you see that Trump was running on a campaign that we're going to have great relations with Russia as best as we can, and the whole narrative on the left and the progressives,
it's gone the other way now, Michelle, hasn't it? Right now, we're involved in the most vicious talk between us and Russia that we've had since the Cold War. A lot of Trump supporters are very, very worried. Thank you guys for your call. Keep ringing the show, keep supporting us, and we'll keep following you too. And I'm going to go, my last call of the night, to Sheila in Church Langley. Sheila, should we go all out for regime change?
Definitely. You see, Assad has got a big following in his country, Nigel. Yep. He must be left alone. We will have a repeat of Libya and Iraq. No way must it continue. What we need to do is put pressure on Mr. Trump, who I believe in the past was quite all right with Mr. Putin, and by putting pressure on him, and when all this dies down a little bit, they'll get talking, and hopefully he'll be able to influence Assad through Mr. Trump. Hopefully,
yeah.
And we don't want another Iraq by any means. We'll have terrorist things happening all over. But I do wonder, Nigel, that Trump's son-in-law, who is Jewish, and maybe he's been influenced, he would have the history of the Jews being gassed and all that business, And I dare say maybe some influence came from there, and I don't blame them.
Well, I can't comment. I can't comment directly on that, Sheila. But clearly, there's a lot of people in the White House now urging Trump to go a lot further than he went last Thursday night, Friday morning. And I'm, Sheila, like you, very worried about it. My final thought on all of this is, let's just think about this, shall we? A tyrant running a Middle Eastern country who treats opponents very, very badly and who is seen to have used gas against his own people. Something must be done, said Tony Blair and George W. Bush. And we went to war in Iraq and we got rid of him. Hooray! Then we got rid of Gaddafi and we made it worse, not better. And whatever crimes Assad has committed, he is fighting ISIS, who pose a threat to our way of life. Please let us not make this mistake again. That's how I feel. You've been listening